So we are now getting confirmation from Bibi Netanyahu that the official plan for the Gaza Strip, we've been talking about, what's the plan for the day after from the beginning? Some of us have been saying, the plan is probably full ethnic cleansing and removal of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip and complete reoccupation. Bibi Netanyahu now confirming that that is in fact the case. He says, if your Hebrew is a little rusty or Arabic is a little rusty as mine is here, he says, we are ready to discuss the final phase of the war. Hamas will lay down its arms. Its leaders will be allowed to leave. We will take care of security in Gaza and implement Trump's voluntary migration plan. This is our plan. We're not hiding it, and we're ready to talk about it at any time. This, of course, comes amid a renewed bombing campaign and ground invasion and complete siege of the Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip has already been reduced effectively to rubble, according to Trump's envoy there, Steve Witkoff, who went and visited Gaza and said there's basically nothing left. We continue to get horror stories of the atrocities that are being committed there. We also have this, we could put this next piece up on the screen, more details about the systematic use of Palestinians as human shields. Every accusation is a confession. This is published in Haaretz. This is an Israeli newspaper. It says, in Gaza, almost every IDF platoon keeps a human shield, a sub-army of Palestinian slaves. Let me go ahead and read this to you. This person writes, I served in Gaza for 9 months. First came across these procedures called Mosquito Protocol in December 2023. It was only 2 months into the ground offensive, long before there was a shortage of dogs from the IDF's K9 unit who were used for this purpose. This became the insane, unofficial excuse for this insane, unofficial procedure. I didn't realize then how ubiquitous using human shields, who we refer to as shawish, would become. Today, almost every platoon keeps a shawish. No infantry force enters a house before a shawish clears it. This means there are 4 shawishes in a company, 12 in a battalion, and at least 36 in a brigade. We operate a sub-army of slaves. So this coming directly from someone who served in the Gaza Strip in the IDF for 9 months. Saagar, we'd received reports of this before, but this speaks to the widespread, systematic use of Palestinians for this purpose. But I wanted to get your reaction to what Bibi is announcing there, saying like, Trump's plan to take over Gaza, yeah, that's our plan. We're not hiding it. That's what we're going for. And we know that they had actually spoken to some African nations about like, hey, will you take these people? And if you think that this is going to be quote unquote voluntary migration, I mean, this is part of what the current starvation campaign is designed to compel, to force them to have no other choice if they want to live but to leave the Gaza Strip.
And that's also the issue with the overall U.S. policy right now, is we explicitly quasi-endorsed this from the beginning. And so now we own it. And in that way, we are now responsible, both, and obviously not only in terms of providing weapons, but most importantly, in terms of how this is going to reshape things in the region in the future. Because if you think about our relationship with Jordan, with Saudi Arabia, I mean, if we have some grand goal in the Middle East, what it is, for me, it's get the hell out. But, I guess if we're going to stay, is to what? Is to secure peace in this region, which is very important, petrochemicals to the United States. Well, how exactly are we supposed to be doing any of this whenever we are explicitly backing and then responsible and endorsing this mass expulsion? That's why no U.S. government ever, even some of the most pro-Israel presidents of all time, have always moved against the Israelis and trying to move them away from what their obvious goal in this case was. It's only Trump who's just taken the mask off. I mean, even Biden tacitly somewhat endorsed it, right? But rhetorically would not go all the way there. Trump was just thinking he's smart, being like, we're gonna own the Gaza Strip, and then also backing effectively the mass expulsion. And so when you have that endorsement, they will take that and run with it as far as they can possibly go. And the ramifications for us is disastrous. That human shields thing too, like you said, this is also part of what drives me crazy, is there is a thing in the West where we're not really allowed to even say these things until the Israeli press admits them. And then even then,
You wouldn't see that article in the New York Times.
See it. Exactly. Yeah. That is what drives me, this recently happened. We haven't had time to put in this New York Times report. I'm not sure if you saw it, which it's multiple pages long, and it's about the role of the Pentagon and the CIA in running the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been screaming here for 3 years about all this stuff, but it's like you're not allowed to admit it until it becomes verified by the New York Times. I feel that way in this case as well. And yeah, in the Western press and in all of our discussion here of the conflict, we just look, we don't even pay any attention. Yeah. And they're writing it in English for all of us to see. It's not difficult. And this doesn't even mean you have to be some keffiyeh wearing pal. You just have to be like, yeah, I don't know. Why are we paying for this? What exactly are we getting out of this? You can even be callous if you want to look at it that way. And yet, the media environment here is just so propagandized and shaped that, yeah, even the quasi-liberal institutions are not able. We're about to talk about this medics thing.
Yeah.
I just saw this from Ryan. Ryan flagged that in the New York Times, they're like, we can't independently verify these claims. And Ryan's like, you guys want a Pulitzer Prize and you don't know how to get someone in Gaza on the phone?
You don't know
what are you doing?
Yeah, and he says specifically, because this is about Red Crescent,
yes,
which is their equivalent of the Red Cross. Red Crescent medics, he's like, you can't get the Red Crescent on the phone to verify these
I've never
claims?
even met them, but I guarantee you I could do it.
To your point, Shail Ben-Ephraim, who we have had on the show, who is like a self-described liberal Zionist, he was saying on Twitter, left out of this conversation about like the deportations of the protesters and the crackdown on dissent and all of this stuff, is the fact that, and he was someone who was critical of the protesters. Like this is not a keffiyeh wearing guy, right? He was like, the protesters were right. Israel has behaved in exactly as monstrous a way. I'm paraphrasing, these aren't exactly his words, in exactly as monstrous a way as they were depicted. And they were, and that's the thing is like, from the very beginning of this onslaught, post-October 7th, the people who were the most maximalist on, lefties, keffiyeh-wearing people were the most accurate about what the goals were and what this would ultimately look like. You could listen to them, or you could listen to the settlers, the most fanatic zealots, about their goals. And that would have given you a much better understanding of what the goals were and what was likely to unfold than listening either to the propagandist in Israel or certainly the propagandist here in the U.S., either from a political class or from our media class. But to speak to the incident that you're talking about here, there were 15 Palestinian medics, including one UN employee, who were executed in Gaza. And you're talking about 15 people who were killed one by one. So intentionally killed one after another and then buried in a mass grave. So at the State Department briefing, whoever this person is, this new, the equivalent of Matthew Miller of this administration, gets asked about this and whether there's going to be any sort of accountability for this naked atrocity and slaughter intentionally of paramedics. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
The UN's Humanitarian Affairs Office has said that 15 paramedics, civil defence and a UN worker were killed, in their words, one by one by the IDF. They have dug bodies up, they said, in a shallow grave that have been gathered up, and also vehicles in the sand. Have you got any assessment of what might have happened, and given the potential use of American weapons, is there any assessment of whether or not this complied with international law?
Well, I can tell you that for too long, Hamas has abused civilian infrastructure, cynically using it to shield themselves. Hamas's actions have caused humanitarians to be caught in the crossfire. The use of civilians or civilian objects to shield or impede military operations is itself a violation of international humanitarian law. And of course, we expect all parties on the ground to comply with international humanitarian law.
But this is specifically a question on it's a question about accounting and accountability, given that it may have been the use of US weapons. So it's a question about the State Department rather than Hamas. Is there any action to assess?
Every single thing that is happening in Gaza is happening because of Hamas. Every single dynamic.
Every single thing that is happening in Gaza is happening because of Hamas. I mean, it's just like, it's, the Biden administration, it's not really any different. It's just more It's more naked, more brazen. Like Israel literally has zero agency or zero responsibility for any of their actions, which we know has decimated the entire Gaza Strip, killed, we don't even have a clue, tens of thousands at the least, women and children, elderly, paramedics, journalists, schools are leveled, mosques are leveled. I mean, it's just on and on and on. And the official stance of the State Department is they bear zero responsibility. So they could literally nuke the Gaza Strip, and it's all Hamas's fault. They have no agency for their actions at all.
But if Russia nukes Ukraine, then all of us have to get involved. You see how this all falls apart, and it's all preposterous. Let's go to the next part here, because honestly, this is pretty grim. Quote, only 3% of Jewish Israelis are, quote, morally opposed to the Trump-Netanyahu plan to depopulate Gaza. Some 14% consider it a distraction. More than 80% say they support the forced removal from Gaza.
There you go.
That's pretty important. You know, this is the other thing that we may underestimate. As much as the Israeli press is actually far more honest about their coverage and airing of dissent, we should also be real about where the majority of the population is. And we should not make the critical mistake that Westerners always make, which is pointing to dissident media inside of the country and see, this is what they're being exposed to. That would be like an outsider pointing to Jacobin or something and saying, like, see, this is available in America. It's like, yeah, it's available, but like, that's not what people are reading every day.
It's probably more Americans that read Haaretz.
Yeah, you're right. I've spent a lot of time in Israel. You know what they watch? They watch the same bullshit that we do, which is their stupid cable news.
Like their equivalent
their
of
equivalent
Fox
of Fox News. And yeah, their equivalent of Fox News, very different than Haaretz, which we've played some of the clips here, but you have to translate from Hebrew, so it's more difficult for us to understand. But you ever go there, I can guarantee you, they love TV. Yeah, the Israelis actually love the news in the same way that I guess we do, in terms of our addiction to cable television. And I can tell you that the cable TV over there, very different than what you're reading in Haaretz or Times of Israel.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.